Today's daf we're going to be learning Bava Batra daf Kuf Yud Zayin. Modim Simcha to everyone. Today's daf is dedicated in memory of Professor Paul Haberfield, father of Shuli Mishkin, who passed away on Thursday. Tanchumim from the whole Hadran family. For those of you who don't know Shuli, she writes flashback for us every week, so we'll miss her for the next week or so, and wishing her all the best. Okay, we are now starting from the Mishnah at the bottom of Kuf Tet Zayin Amud Bet. We'll go back. We're now starting not a new topic, but kind of a new topic, which is, since we're talking about Nachala, we're now moving to a particular instance of Nachala, which is really going to get to a broader issue of how, when the tribes got into the land of Israel, okay, because when we talk about Nachala and inheritance, we're talking about two things really. One is the land, and if particularly we're talking about the land of Israel, right? The land goes back to the distribution that was way back when, and we're going to get to how that kind of when it took place, how it was decided who got what portion and how the portions were divided, how big a portion people got, what it was based on. We're going to have a whole big debate here, three-way debate. And the Mishnah is going to talk specifically about the Benot Tzlafcha, which the reason we got to them was because we were talking about daughters inheriting. We had a lot to do with that. So we're going to start with them. The Mishnah says, Benot Tzlafcha natzilu shlosha chalakim v'nachala. We did this already, but I'll review it because it's very important to understand when we move into our daf. They got three portions. Why did they get three portions when they came into the land? Well, they got chelak avihem, shayim yotzei Mitzrayim. That was the whole thing. They were going to inherit their father. So their father, now the father didn't have land. He didn't live in the land of Israel. What were they inheriting from him, right? His part in the desert. Okay, so they must have inherited the land that he was promised as a person who got out of Egypt. We're going to see how that worked. Not only that, they got two more portions. One was the portion that their father was supposed to get after their father died, then his father died, and his father would have passed down his inheritance to Tzlafchad. Instead, that went, since Tzlafchad wasn't alive anymore, to his daughters, who were his heirs. And because he was the Bechor, V'shaya Bechor notel shnei chalakim. So he actually got two portions of his father's, which again, he didn't get any of it, but it went straight to his daughters because he wasn't alive anymore, and they inherited his two portions of the land. So now the Gemara is going to say, Tznan kiman de'amar liyotzei Mitzrayim nitchalka ha'aretz. The Mishnah must be according to the one who says that the land was divided up by those who left Egypt. Now, before we start, I want to read the psukim. Did I put my last year? Yeah, we're going to read the psukim now and say for Bamidbar, we're going to understand where these three opinions come from. They all come from this confusion between two psukim that seem to be somewhat contradictory. So in Bamidbar, chapter 26, verse 52, starts the section on, okay, it's right after the Jews are counted. We're talking about the count at the end of Sefer Bamidbar. Bamidbar starts with the count. Those are people at the beginning of the time period in the desert. Then we go through the whole time period in the desert in Sefer Bamidbar. We're now toward the end. Here we're standing before the people that are standing here are going to go into the land. And Moshe tells them, or God says, V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe limor, God spoke to Moshe saying, La'ela techalek ha'aretz b'nachala b'mispar shemot. To these people, the land will be divided. That sounds like when we get into the land, we're going to divide it based on who's in front of us. That would be le'ba'eh ha'aretz, nitchalka ha'aretz, right? That it was divided up to the people going into the land. That's the way it sounds like. Then there's this pasuk which we'll get to at the end of the Shiur today. La'rav tarben nachalato v'lama'at tamit nachalato. If you have a lot of people, you get a lot of land. If you have few people, you get less land. Ish lefi pikodav yutan nachalato. So each person, according to their how many people they have, will get land. Okay, now, by the way, if you say la'ela techalek ha'aretz, it's quite obvious, right? And it was given to, according to, you're going to get portions based on how many people from your family are standing in front of us today. Well, then obviously, if you have a lot of people, you're going to get a lot of land. If you have a few people, you're going to get a little bit of land, which means basically it's a totally unnecessary pasuk. That's how we're going to end today. But now comes the next pasuk. But bigoral yechalek ha'aretz, it will be divided up by a lottery system. Lishmot matot avotam yinchalu. You're going to get divided by the names. Now, before we said b'mispar shemot, according to your names, now. But all of a sudden, the pasuk says you're going to get according to the names of your fathers. That's a very strange pasuk. Didn't we just say you're going to get according to how many people are standing in front of us today? So, which seems like all the people we just counted. By the way, we counted the people from the age of 20, which would sound like every person above the age of 20 or from 20 and up gets a portion of land. And presumably an equal portion, right? We're going to divide it equally according to each of the people standing in front of us today. But then it says we're going to divide it by the matot of your avot, by, the way your fathers were. So that seems weird. Your fathers aren't anymore here, right? They're not here anymore, presumably. We're now with sons or daughters in the case where there's no sons. Something doesn't jive with those psukim. Because of that, we're going to have 3 different ways to interpret. So the Gemara first starts off and says, before they start this very long braita that's going to go all the way to Amud Bet, Tanan Kiman Amar Liyotzei Mitzrayim Nitchal Haaretz. The Mishnah is clearly going, okay, they already know that there's this big machloket, which we don't yet know about, but that the Mishnah goes according to those who say that the land was divided up to those leaving Egypt. And that's why both Chefer and Tzlofchad had their own portions, because both of them, and we're going to see soon, were over the age of 20 when they got out of Egypt. And therefore, each one had their own portion of land. So Tzlofchad got a portion, and Chefer got a portion. And that's why the daughters of Tzlofchad each got a portion of Tzlofchad's when they went into the land, and 2 portions of Chefer. Right? Again, obviously, each portion they got was divided in 5. So they got a 5th of what Tzlofchad had, and of the portion that their father got, the 2 portions of Chefer, they each got a 5th of that, because there were 5 daughters. So now we're going to see the 3 opinions. And Ditanya, as it says in a braita, Rabbi Yoshia Omer, Liyotzei Mitzrayim Nitchal Haaretz. We're going to have to do for each of these 3 opinions is figure out how they read these 2 psukim. Number 1 saying Le'ela Techalek Haaretz, the land will be divided up according to the people standing in front of us today, the ones going into the land, and where it seems to say it's also divided up by the ones who got out of Egypt. Again, assuming that Matav or Tam is the ones who got out of Egypt, which that's not clear either. But when we refer back to their fathers, what does that mean? So Rabbi Yoshia says that the land was divided up by those who got out of Egypt. Shenemar lishmot matot avotam yinchalu. And it's going to be clear to everybody that this pasuk is talking about those who got out of Egypt. We'll have to see why later. The Gemara will finally explain when we get to the end of this long braita. But let's just take that as an assumption right now. So lishmot matot avotam yinchalu means basically the land was given to the fathers who got out of Egypt. Each person who got out of Egypt got a portion, but not everyone. And that's why we have the pasuk le'ele. Elamani mekayem la'ele techalek haaretz b'nachalasa. What do we do with that first pasuk Nun Gimel 53, which says it was given to these people? Sounds like the people going into the land are getting each a portion and not their fathers who got out of Egypt. La'ele ka'ele. It doesn't mean to these people. It means like these people. What does it mean like these people? Well, like these people that we just counted. Now, I told you about this age 20 thing. That's where it comes from. Lehotzia katfalim. It's to say, well, it's each person who got out of Egypt was given a portion, but each person who came out of Egypt who is like the people counted today, meaning if they were 20 years old when they got out of Egypt, they got a portion. If they were younger than 20, the tfalim mean the little kids, if they were under 20, they didn't get a portion. Anyone over 20 when they left Egypt, if they were over 20 or 20 or over, would get a portion. Anyone too young wouldn't get a portion. And basically what we're saying is, all you people standing in front of us today, you will get a portion based on your parents, okay? Whoever got out of Egypt. If you have parents who got out of Egypt, and let's say you're 5 girls now, like Tzlofchad's daughters, you're not going to each get 5 portions when you get into the land. We're not dividing up the land by you, and that fits with the Mishnah. What did they get? Well, both Chefer and Tzlofchad must have been over 20 when they got out of Egypt. And that's why the daughters got a portion of Chefer's or 2 portions of Chefer's and 1 portion of Tzlofchad. That's opinion number 1. So the real important pasuk really is Lishmot Matot Avotam Yinchalu. That comes to really explain how the Nachala was divided. By the fathers, by those who got out of Egypt. Again, we don't really know why by the fathers refers to those getting out of Egypt. We'll have to see later why that's clearly a reference to those getting out of Egypt. And la'ela doesn't mean you're really getting a portion. La'ela techalek ha'aretz, the land's going to be divided to you. Doesn't really mean to you. It means like you standing here at 20. Oh, also there, it was anyone age 20, and that's how we're going to get the land. That's how we're going to divide it. Rabbi Yonatan omer, leba'ei ha'aretz, nitchal ha'aretz. Okay, so Debbie, you're saying, and this is very important, we're going to get to this, but almost everyone in the desert died because anyone who got out of Egypt that was 20 died during the time in the desert because of Chet HaMeraglim. Because of the punishment of the spies, anyone who was age 20 at the time died in the desert, and they died basically every year of those years. And every year we'll see in a few days, we're going to get to the daf about Tu B'Av, and that they died every year on Tisha B'Av, possibly. Anyway, they died out throughout the desert, and basically anyone who got out of Egypt was not going into the land, and that's why also it makes it right. There was the divided was there, but it was their children who were inheriting. Rabbi Yonatan omer, leba'ei ha'aretz nitchal ha'aretz. So Rabbi Yonatan says no, it was divided. Everybody got a portion based on. So the Bnot Tzlachad, according to him, would have gotten 5 portions, not right. A fifth, each one got a fifth of their father, and then another, right, a fifth of the 2 portions, the chefer, that was supposed to go to their father. But no, they each got their own equal portion. The land was divided not by the previous generation, by the now generation. The one standing going into the land, divided equally by all the people there, but with one caveat, okay? Now, it's a bit strange, okay, so get ready to try to understand something. It's a little harder to understand. Shenemar, okay, so let's just read how they get that. Shenemar le'ela techalek ha'aretz b'nachalah. So instead of picking the second pasuk is the really important one, as the first opinion did, which is, right, the lishmo matot avotam yinchalu, they will inherit based on their fathers. No, this one says le'ela techalek. The land is divided by all the people standing in front of us today. Elamani makayim lishmo matot avotam yinchalu. But something has to go backwards to the fathers because it says so. So what does this mean? Now, they don't really explain it. The mashal of Rebbe is going to explain it better, but we'll explain it before we get to Rebbe, based on the commentaries. This dividing up of land was very different than normal laws of inheritance. Okay, how does inheritance work? The dead, right, pass on their nachala to the live people, right? The people alive right now inherit from the dead. That's the way it works. V'kan metim yoshim chayim. But here, the dead inherit the live. What on earth does that mean? So the way it works is like this. If we're we have, let's say there were 2 brothers, okay? The Rashbam gives this example. There was Reuven and Shimon got out of Egypt, okay? And had sons in the desert. So they were 20. Everyone assumes this 20 age. They were 20 when they got out of Egypt, and then they each had sons. But Reuven had 1 son, let's say, and Shimon had 9 sons, okay? Now, when they get to the land, so Shimon's sons have 9, and Reuven's son has 1, right? That ends up imbalanced if you go Reuven Shimon, right? Shimon's going to have a lot of portions, 9 portions. Reuven's going to only get 1 portion, his family. Right? Reuven and Shimon are no longer alive. So what happens? Shimon's family gets the 9 portions. Reuven's family gets 1. But now we go backwards. We go back to the dead. We go back to Reuven and Shimon. We take the family. The family had 2 brothers. We now have 2 brothers end up all together between them 2 with 10 portions. And now we divide it equally. Reuven gets half, and that 1 son gets 5 portions, and Shimon gets half. And now the 9 brothers have to divide the half between the 5 portions between them equally. So that's what it means that the metim yoshim chayim. Obviously, the dead people don't inherit; they're not alive anymore; they don't get anything. But the point is, we redistribute it. It's a very strange thing, but it's the only way that Rabbi Yonatan can understand reconciling the Shnei Psukim. And basically says it goes backwards then and gets redivided. In other words, everyone gets a portion equally as they are right now, but they don't actually end up living in that portion. They have to reshuffle things back to the previous generation. And then the question is, does it go with families? Does it go within a tribe? It's not so clear. It seems like families, like whoever were brothers at the time of the getting out of Egypt, we're going to go back and reshuffle according to that family. So, like I said, it's a bit of a strange opinion. And Rebbe, in case you didn't understand it well enough, Rebbe gives you a mashal, which is not exactly a fair mashal, because the Rashbam is going to claim that this case we're going to bring right now was when they agreed to this from the beginning. And obviously no one agreed to this from the beginning, but it was kind of got to determine this was how it would be, according to him. So I'm a Rebbe. I'm sholach mashal ma'adabar domet. What is this like? L'shnei achim kohanim shayu be'ir echad. There are two kohanim who live in the same city. Le'echad yesh lo ben echad, ve'echad yesh lo shnei banim. So this is going to be talking about truma and the distribution of truma. So we have these two brothers, and one has two sons and one has one. Now, when you send your kids to go get the truma at the goren, they're only going to give each one portion. So they made an arrangement that they'll send all their sons together, but again, one has double the amount that the other one has. They'll go each get a portion. Okay, so again, one has one son, one has two sons. Hachula goren, they went to the goren, which is the place where they would, the threshing floor where they would distribute the truma. So everybody gets one portion. So the one with one son gets one portion. The one with two sons gets two portions. And then they go bring it back to their fathers, right? In this case, it's literally rather than in the Nachala where the fathers are dead, but it's as if. But they go back to their fathers, and the two brothers split it 50-50. Okay? Now again, the Rashbam says that was the arrangement they made. They agreed to this, right? Otherwise, there would be no reason why the one who had two sons would have to share with the one who has one son. But the point is, it was an agreement between them, and that's like the Nachala was. It was like if God made this agreement with all of them before, that's how it's going to work. Because again, there has to be something that goes back to how many people got out of Egypt. So therefore, it's going to be redistributed based on how many people were in the family at the time they got out of Egypt. So that's the second interpretation. So it was distributed to those coming into the land, but somehow connected back to those who got out of Egypt. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Okay, so what's left, right? We have Liot Mitzrayim, we have Lebai Haaretz. Well, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says the following. Turning now to Amud Le'elu v'la'elu nitzchaka haaretz. The land was divided up also to those going out of Egypt, and also to those coming into the land of Israel. Kedei l'kayem shnei hamikra'ot halalu. And that way, right, because theoretically, I mean, if you look at both psukim, they both say, this is how the land will be distributed. The land will be distributed to you, and it also said the land will be distributed according to your fathers. So he says both. Haketzad, how does that work? Well, it sort of depends on what the makeup of your family was and how old people were at the time. Hayami Yotzei Mitzrayim, if you had someone in your family who got out, your father got out of Mitzrayim and was over the age of 20, Notel Chalkom Yotzei Mitzrayim, you would get your father's portion. Hayami, let's say the Rashbam claims, let's say you're younger than 20 when you get into the land. So your father was 20, over 20, but you're not. Let's say your father was, your father was 20 at the time, and then you were born much later, right? You were born when your father was 55, and you're only 5 years old. No, not 55. 55. You're now 5 years left to getting out of the desert, right? So you're 5 years old. Hayami ba'eh haaretz. Let's say now you're 20, but your father was, not 20 at the time, and you're over 20 now. That could very easily be, right? Your father was less than 20. He was 18 when they got out of Egypt, then got married, had a kid. You're now that kid who's over 20. Mikan and mikan. What if you're both? What if both your father was over 20 and you're over 20, which could also be, right? These are all possibilities. Notel chalkom mikan and mikan. So then you get two portions. And the Rashbam suggests that mikan and mikan could be you yourself came out of Egypt and also went into the land. The problem is there's almost no one who did that because of the Chet HaMeraglim. That really goes, Debbie, to what you were saying before. Until now, it wasn't really relevant whether you could have been both, right? Now they're saying, theoretically, if you could have been both, you might have gotten a portion of each. But let's just assume mikan and mikan is both your father got out of Egypt and when he was over the age of 20, and you actually would end up with two portions because you'd have your father's portion and you'd have your own portion. Seems a little unfair, right? Why should you, just because it happened to work out that way, why should you end up with a double portion? But that's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's opinion. Now, assuming that we're going with anyone who got, okay, the 2 out of the 3 opinions say that each person who got out of Egypt was actually given a portion, right? It's just you also say those who got out of Israel were given a portion or not. But going along those 2 opinions and not Rabbi Yonatan's opinion doesn't think so. But we're going to now talk about 3 groups of people who left Egypt but don't get land in Israel. Miraglim, the spies, who basically said, we shouldn't go to the land, it's bad land and all that. Or they didn't exactly say the words, we shouldn't go to the land, but they made everybody think that the land was bad. Yehoshua and Caleb natzlu chelkam. So they lost their portion, which theoretically should have gone to their children, but Yehoshua and Caleb get their portion because they were the ones who obviously said, don't listen to the spies. Mitlonenim va'adat Korach lo haya lehem chelik ba'aretz. Those who complained, now there were a lot of complaints in the desert. What exactly do we mean? We're going to get to this tomorrow, that the Gemara is going to say. It actually means those who complained with Korach, which could be theoretically the 250 people with Korach went along with him. It could be the people who complained kind of with Korach from the sidelines, kind of agreed with him. Unclear exactly, but the Mitzlonanim and the Adat Korach, and because if you say the Mitzlonanim were those who went with Korach, then what's Adat Korach? But maybe Adat Korach is Korach himself and Datan Naviram. Anyway, it's unclear exactly how to explain this. But the Mitzlonanim Adat Korach lo haya lehem chelik ba'aretz, didn't have a portion in the land. How do we know this, by the way, that they don't have a portion in the land? Well, it all comes from the Bnot Tzlafchad. If you go back to Bamidbar in those chapters, so in chapter 27, which is the next chapter, basically once they get all the laws about the Nachala, then Bnot Tzlafchad come forward and say, hey, what about us? We don't have a father. And what did they say? Avinu meit Bamidbar, our father died in the desert. Okay, I'm in chapter 27, verse 3. V'hu lo haya betoch ha'edah hanoadim al Hashem ba'adat Korach. Ki b'chet'o meit ubanim lo hayu lo. And they say the words like this. Our father died in the desert. He wasn't part of the group that went against God with the group of Korach, which is a lot of unnecessary words. He wasn't with the Edah, with the community who were Noadim al Hashem, with the Edah of Korach. So we're going to see later in tomorrow's daf, they're going to say the Edah is the Meraglim, the Noadim al Hashem are the Mitzlonanim, and Adat Korach is Korach. And Ki b'chet'o meit, he wasn't part of them because he died for his own sin. Ubanim lo hayu lo, and he has no sons. Okay, that's not important. Why did they have to point this out? He obviously sinned. They said he sinned, right? He died because of his sins, but he wasn't part of those people. Why do they have to say that? The assumption is, if he was part of those people, he wouldn't have gotten nachala. And that's how we learn that they didn't get nachala. Otherwise, they would have nothing to say. They would say, they would be told right away, well, don't complain that your father doesn't have sons. Your father doesn't have nachala at all. Okay? Big question. I see someone asked this in the chat, and I was actually wondering myself, and I tried to find commentaries. I didn't look extensively, but I didn't really find comments on it. Korach is a Levi, so he theoretically shouldn't have nachala anyway. So I have to really look up better. There are Levite cities, and maybe the Levites did get some sort of nachala in these Levite cities, or maybe they didn't really have their own nachala. Not really sure exactly, because Korach was a Levi, and then what kind of land would he be getting anyway? So that's a side question, which I don't yet have an answer to. Hopefully over time we'll figure that out. I'll try to look it up better. So now we have, again, the 3 opinions in the Braita. Then we have and I thought of that also. That could be Adat Korach means, the people on Reuven's side, the Datan Naviram, and On Ben Pelet, and unclear exactly. Again, it all really depends on how you understand the Mitzlonanim. The Mitzlonanim are really the Adat Korach, the 250 people, then you can't explain Korach that way. If you say that Korach, or maybe it could be, I don't, it's unclear exactly how to read this, but there's possibilities. So now we say, what about their sons then? So where'd their sons go when they got into the land? The sons of all these people. Now, these people were killed in the desert, so they obviously didn't need land anyway. But what about their sons? Habanim natzlu b'schut avi avihem u'b'schut avi imoteihem. Okay, let's start with the avi avihem. If their grandfathers, their fathers' fathers, had land because they got out of Egypt, they were 20 already, and they were from Yotzei Mitzrayim. If they were from Yotzei Mitzrayim, their grandfathers on their father's side, they would get that land. So they didn't get the portion, let's say, like Chefer and Slavchad. So Slavchad and Chefer both had portion. Slavchad, let's say, if he was from those people, which he wasn't, he wouldn't have gotten land, and his children wouldn't have gotten the land when they got into land, but they would have taken Chefer's portion. So that's good. What about Avi Imotehen? Well, let's say their mother's father also got a portion in the land and had no brothers. This is why I separated from them, because if she had brothers, all the grandfather's portion would go to the brothers. It wouldn't go to these grandchildren from the mother. But if their mother had no brothers, then their mother would be in line to inherit from her father, and then they could get their mother's portion. So that would work. Okay. That's the end of the Breita. So that was a very, very long Breita. Okay, almost a whole Amud and a half. Short one, but still a short Amud and a half. But yes, it was an Amud and a half of the three opinions, and then these people who didn't get Nachala at all. And again, that is only if you hold that the people who came out of the desert were supposed to get Nachala. Otherwise, it would be irrelevant to us. Of course, they wouldn't get Nachala. They weren't standing. They were all killed in the desert. They weren't standing to get the land. So, of course, they wouldn't. So this is all not according to Rabbi Yonatan. But now the Gemara goes back to ask what I said we were going to ask, which is, how did we get from my mashma dehai lishmot matot avotam yotzei Mitzrayim k'tiv? How do you know that lishmot matot avotam, it goes back to their fathers, is about yotzei Mitzrayim? Dilma lishvatim ka'amrala. Maybe it just means they got with their tribe. Like if they go all the way back to Reuven, right? Tribe of Reuven gets with Reuven, and tribe of Shimon gets with Shimon. Maybe that's what it was saying. It has nothing to do with those who got out of Egypt, and then it wouldn't teach you, right, either that the land was divided up and everyone who got out of Egypt got a portion, or according to Rabbi Yonatan, he also understands it has to do with Mitzrayim. He just says, it goes back, it gets reshuffled according to how many brothers there were when they got out of Egypt. But everybody thinks it has to do with that. Why did they get that? Dichtiv, well, it's because of a different pasuk. Now, in the section where, if you remember, the why do we have four cups? Because the four lashonot of Geulah, right? And basically God says, right, I'm going to do all those things. And he promises, and then he says, this is in Shemot chapter 6, God says, "Ve'heveti etchem al haaretz asher nasati et yadi latet ota l'Avraham li'Yitzchak v'Yaakov." I'm going to bring you to the land, right? This is what's going to happen down the road. Ve'natati ota lachem morasha ani Hashem. And then God promises to the Jews that are sitting in Egypt right now, that are going to get out soon. He promises them, I will give this to you as inheritance. So they were promised inheritance. And therefore, based on that pasuk, they understand the pasuk, when later God says, according to your fathers, they realize that must be because of the promise that God made to the Jews who were in Egypt, who were about to get out of Egypt, that this will be given to you as inheritance. And therefore, it's obvious that it's the Yotzei Mitzrayim, and because of that, Yerushai, so Natati ota lachem morashani Hashem, the Gemara quotes, Yerushai lachem me'avotechem u'liyotzei Mitzrayim ka'amar la, right? It was a Yerusha, it was already given an inheritance from your fathers, and that was said to the Yotzei Mitzrayim, and therefore it gets divided according to them. Siman, now we have a siman for these 6 questions that Rav Papa is going to ask to Abaye, all about something about the division of the land. We'll see each one kind of a little different. Amalei Rav Papa Abaye, we'll get through the first question. We'll go a little bit into tomorrow's daf, because very short daf today, so we'll just finish this section into the second line of tomorrow's daf. Amalei Rav Papa Abaye. So basically he's going to say, I can explain what I'm going to explain in a minute, which we don't yet know, but I can explain it very well if you say it's Liyotzei Mitzrayim. It was given to the people getting out of Egypt. But I don't have a good way to explain this if you say it was given to those who were going into the land of Israel, if it was divided by those going into the land. Why is that? Well, let's see what pasuk. And I told you we'd end with this. Hainu dichtiv larav tarben nachalato v'lama'at tam'it nachalato. It says in the pasuk that if you have a lot of people, then you'll get a lot of land. If you have few people, you'll get less land. So that I can understand according to Yotzei Mitzrayim. Because what's that pasuk telling you? Well, if you have you were a lot of people when you got out of Egypt, but right now you happen to be fewer, okay, and there's families with a lot more people than you, you're going to actually get a lot. Why are you going to get a lot? Because you were a lot when you got out of Egypt. And if you were few people when you got out of Egypt, even though now your family's huge, they're going to get a smaller portion. And that's what we call the chidush of that pasuk. That's the unique need for that pasuk. Because you might have thought, well, now I have a lot of kids, so we'll get a lot of land. And the point is, no. If you were few then you're not going to get a lot. And if you were plenty then you're going to get plenty, even though now you might be fewer. Or you might have a smaller family compared to others. But moving out of the first line on the next daf, but if you say that it's divided by who's in front of us right now, so you don't need to tell me now. It's not wrong, but it's just totally unnecessary. And that's how, when I read the Psukim, I said it was really unnecessary. Why do you need to say if you have a big family, you'll get a lot? We already know that. If it's divided by how many people are standing in front of us today, obviously, if you have a big family, you're right. And again, it would have to be, we don't mean big family like you have 10 kids under 10, right? We mean big family. There's a lot of people over 20 now from your family because it was only given to those over 20. But if you have a lot, you'll get a lot, right? And it wasn't divided if you have 10 kids under 20, right? You don't get more land. You get based on how many if you're one person, you get one portion. So this doesn't make any sense, L'Rav Tarbu and L'Ma'at Tamid, because again, it makes perfect sense, but it's totally unnecessary. It makes so much sense that there's no point to say it. If, you were one person who got out of Egypt who had 10 kids and all those 10 kids are now over the age of 20, of course, you're going to get a lot of land because each of those 10 kids is going to get a portion. So totally unnecessary pasuk, and the Gemara ends with kasha. Yeah, in fact, it's difficult. Hard to explain why there was a need for that pasuk and what that pasuk is teaching us if you get a lot of land based on, if it means you get a lot of land based on how many people you are. So with that, we'll end today. We'll do a quick review. We started with how many portions of Bnot Tzlafcha got. The Gemara pointed out that Mishnah, our Mishnah, only makes sense if you say it was given to those getting out of Egypt, because if it was given just to the people standing in front of us right now, when they got into the land, the Bnot Tzlafcha would not have gotten a portion of their father, and they would not have gotten a portion of their grandfather, and therefore it must be that. And with that, we brought the three opinions. Either it was given to the people getting out of Egypt, plain and simple. What did it have to do with those people standing in front of us? That was just to tell you from what age 20, just like now. Also, then it was age 20. Or we say it was really given to the people standing there in front of us today. They each got a portion, but they had to a little bit reshuffle it. And that was what the other pasuk came to say. They had to reshuffle it based on how many brothers in the family existed at the time they got out of Egypt. And again, just to review, I didn't say this, I should have said this 2 minutes ago, or a minute ago, that this is all based on those two verses, that one seems to say to you it will be divided, and one seems to say according to your fathers it will be divided. How do we reconcile those two psukim? Each one reconciles them differently. And the third opinion was it was given to both. So you could theoretically get a portion from then and a portion from now. Not everybody did, but some people did, which seems a little bit unfair, but that's his opinion. And then we talked about the people who didn't get Nachala at all. At least the Meraglim portion, we were told, was given to Caleb and Yehoshua. The rest, we don't know what happened. Probably it was just thrown back into the pot and then divided by everybody, in a sense. Or we don't know exactly what happened to it. It's not so clear. And then we just had to establish, once we finished that Braita, was it obvious that Shemot Matoda Botam is talking about the people getting out of Egypt, and that's because this other pasuk where they were promised, you will get the land as inheritance, seems to be implying they're the ones who the land was promised to. And then Rav Papa started his first of 6 questions from the pasuk L'Rav Tarben Nachalato V'Lama'at Tamid Nachalato. It really only makes sense if you say Yotzei Mitzrayim, because then you can explain it. It goes by how many people, how large your family was then, even if right now it's not, or how small your family was then, even if now it's large. And that would explain it. Otherwise, it's really unnecessary because it's just explaining the obvious. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and Moadim L'Simcha.